Hey fellas, thanks for tuning in again to jasestewart.com. Jase here, obviously. I got a question from my old mate from footy, Clint Lestrange. How are you, buddy? It's good to hear from you again, man. I'm glad you're on the page. So the question was relating to how to read food labels. So I'm going to do two things. Firstly, tell you to download and subscribe to my blog. In return, you'll get a free ebook delivered direct to your email address. About halfway through, there's of that 25-page ebook, you'll see a section there that tells you in very clear fashion how to read food labels. The second thing is obviously the larger ebook, which you've seen on sale. It's $20. It's called Bloke Can Cook. I go into a lot more detail. It took me 2 years to write that fucking thing. And in return, you'd get charged $20 to have a resource sent to your email, and you should read it. Hey, Stewie, can you pass me some fruit or something there, mate, from the fridge? I know this is kind of random. Throw it at you. Okay, so first rule of reading food labels is this. Does this contain a food label? 0. And the point that I'm going to make first, guys, is that in 80% of cases, the key to reading a food label is to avoid reading food labels altogether. If 80% of your diet is made up by foods which don't require you to read a label, then you're spot on the mark. Now, that's not to say that foods that contain a label are unhealthy, but in nearly 100% of cases, foods that don't contain a label are indeed healthy. They are foods in their most natural state that have been unprocessed and are generally full of the good shit, okay? In contrast, the other 20% you've got to look out for is the foods that are labeled, and there's some techniques they want to give you, some really, really quick techniques on how to read food labels. Generally, when it comes to food labels, we pay attention to 4 major components on the food label. The first one is the total fat content. The second one is the saturated fat content. The third one is the sugar content. And the fourth one, which I feel is of lesser important than the top 3, is the sodium or salt content. So what we'll do is, assuming that you don't have any problems with high blood pressure, then we'll tend to focus on the first 3, which is fat, saturated fat, and sugar. So to do so, I'll refer to something I just pulled out of my fridge. It's a tub of baba ganoush, so a type of dip, eggplant dip. So if you go to the nutrient information panel, you're not going to be able to see it on here clear enough, but what you'll find is all packaged foods in Australia by law has to have a nutrition information panel. It lists 2 things. It lists the nutrient breakdown of the actual food, and it lists the ingredients list. So we're going to focus on the nutrient information panel. It contains 2 columns. Now, the 2 columns are per serve. Per serve is a variable amount, and it depends on what the manufacturer decides is an adequate serving size. Of course, when you look at something like a bowl of cereal, it's a 30 or 40 or 50 gram serve, which for most of us, if you like a cup of Cocoa Pops, it's going to be somewhere around 100, 150 gram serve. So it's way underestimated. Just totally do away. Don't even bother looking at the per serve column. What you want to be doing is looking at the per 100 column. There's 2 reasons why you look at the per 100 column. Sorry guys, I've got a bit of sunlight coming through here. 2 reasons why you look at the per 100 column. 1, when you look at the per 100 column, it's a requirement of all packaged foods to have listed per 100 amount. So what that allows you to do, for example, is compare 2 different products. So for example, falafels and the dips that you're about to maybe put them in. So comparing things on a per 100 basis allows you to do a comparative to see what is the better product. So for example, you might compare this dip in this brand with a hummus dip made by another bigger company and be able to tell which one's going to be a little bit more healthier for you. One that I've done quite recently is this brand here is by a company called BTO Top Taste. What I've done is compared the food label on this one compared to the food label on the other brands, and I found that this one is absolutely the best to eat. So the second point about comparing food labels and using the 100 gram column is this. When anything for the mathematicians out there is out of 100, what does that mean? Well, it means that it's a percentage. So to you, something containing 20 grams of fat means nothing. It's the equivalent of 4 teaspoons. So 5 grams is basically a teaspoon. So something that contains 4 teaspoons of fat is about 20 grams. However, because it's 20 grams out of a total of 100, remember we're looking at the 100 column, that also means that it's 20%. So if I said to you, I'm 100 kilos and I have a fat weight of 30 kilos, then you would know that I am 30% fat. Well, in the same way, if you're looking at this one here, for example, the fat content is 4.2. So that basically means that this, that's the per serve column. The total per 100 is 16.2. So this guy is predominantly, about 16% of this product is fat. And then we can look at the rest of it. 30% is carbohydrate, 9% is protein, and then there's a bunch of other stuff in it. Okay, so here's what the guidelines are. An everyday food, you want to be looking for it to be around 10 grams or less per 100 grams of fat. So that is less than 10% fat. The reason we pay attention to fat is really pretty simple. I'm just going to adjust this sunlight a bit, guys. It's pretty simple. It's because foods that are high in fat are also really high in calories. So if you overeat high fat foods, it's quite hard to stay on top of your weight. So you tend to choose foods which are lower in fat. Now this one here is above that 10 grams of fat per 100 grams. So we might automatically think that that is a non-everyday food. Having said that, I eat this one every day for morning tea or lunch. The second inspection you need to make is if your fat content is above 10 grams, what you want to be looking, that's 10 grams per 100, what you want to be looking at is the type of fat that's in it. We're paying particular attention to saturated fat. In this one here, the saturated fat content is 1.3 grams per 100 grams. The recommendation is it must be below 5 grams of saturated fat per 100. Saturated fat's the one that the science says clogs your arteries. The unsaturated fat is the one that's found in things like nuts, fish and the like, and in this case, chickpeas. So chickpeas are really quite high in fat, and that's what falafels are made out of. But the good thing about the fat in this one here is that it's unsaturated fat, so it's not the damaging type of fat. So the guidelines for fat are you really do want to be looking for stuff for the healthiest choice to be less than 10 grams of fat per 100 grams, and ideally less than 5 grams of saturated fat. So this one is a little bit higher in fat. I feel like I need it because I burn so many calories, but it is well below the saturated fat content. What I might do is refer to my mate Stewie's chocolate just bought here. Now, of course, we know the chocolate's a bit of a treat food, but if we go to the per 100 servings, the per 100 column, we're looking at 45 grams of fat per 100. So in this block of chocolate, essentially half of it is fat. It's quite surprising because we tend to think that the majority of chocolate's going to be sugar. In fact, half of it's fat. So that's well above what we consider to be an everyday food, and we know that quite obviously intuitively. So something like this wouldn't meet the guidelines of what's considered an everyday food. Okay, so the next thing we want to pay attention to is the sugar content. Sugar content is worth looking at because sugar is another way that another thing that provides, or nutrient that provides a lot of calories to your diet. So we want to try to minimize the sugar level below about 15 grams per 100 grams. Even better to get it below 10 grams per 100 grams. Anyone that's seen that film, I Quit Sugar, it's a really good example of what can happen. And in a lot of places like McDonald's, for example, if you look at the rolls from McDonald's, it's really strange because you think, they contain no fat, so they must be good. But then you look at the sugar content and it is absolutely through the roof. Try putting your tongue on the burger from McDonald's, a cheeseburger from McDonald's. And if you close your eyes and actually think about it, put your tongue on it, it's actually sweet. And you don't notice it because it's buried into the bun. The calorie content of those types of processed foods is huge. So let's leave it there, guys. The 3 things you want to pay attention to really when you're reading a label in summary is this. Firstly, go to the 100 gram column. That's all that matters. That allows us to look at it as a percentage and to compare 2 different products. First step, look at the total fat content to try to minimize our calories. We want something that's ideally below 10 grams per 100 grams. Secondly, look at the saturated fat content, and ideally we want something that's below 5 grams per 100 grams. The reason we look at that is to minimize our risk of heart conditions. The third one is to get products that are below 15 grams per 100 grams of sugar, and what that allows us to do is minimize our calorie intake. Aside from that, guys, if it meets those guidelines, it's generally an everyday food. So we take something like this guy here, Whilst it is slightly above baba ganoush, the fat content, we know that the fat content's in a really nice form of unsaturated fat. That's because it's made up on chickpeas. And the sugar content is it's less than 1 gram per 100 grams. That makes sense because all this is made up on is eggplants, sesame, garlic, salt, and some lemon. That's it. That's an everyday product. You can eat that guy with falafels every day for lunch and it's happy days. So if you've got any questions, guys, please put them in the comments or send me an inbox and keep the questions coming because I am loving doing this for you fellas.